that last time. Can everyone see my slides switching?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, we'll get started. If there's any issues or the video pauses or anything like that, just let me know, because I know we had an issue with that last time. I'm sure our computers aren't that great at Zoom. They're great for what they do, but Zoom isn't one of those great things. So when I got asked to do this topic, I kind of had a hard time trying to decide exactly what to focus on and how to best do it about keeping loved ones safe and loved ones with special needs. And I figured that the best way to do that is to kind of share general overall safety and fraud prevention tips that you can then go through and optimize and kind of personalize to each situation, right? Because every situation is going to be different in what you allow your loved one access to, or what responsibilities they may or may not have, and what sort of things they may run into. So I just want to throw that out there. These are just kind of general tips that I'm hoping you guys can take and learn about more and be able to better prepare your loved one to be safe out in the community. We'll just start with a couple of quick safety tips. The first being in the home. And one of my biggest tips is that just because something's accessible doesn't mean it's acceptable, right? You don't want loved ones that might be really young or anything like that having access to toxic chemicals or firearms or electric breakers, things of that nature. So just remember to monitor your home and keep in mind of where you put certain things and how you lock certain things up, because just because it's accessible doesn't mean it's acceptable for everyone to have, right? A couple of other general safety tips that we see a lot of and that we get called of is people tripping, whether that be keeping pathways clear, such as hallways, pathways through rooms, things like that. A lot of times people will stack things in their hallways, plants, stuff like that. Other people trip on them, or they themselves trip on them when they're not paying attention and get hurt. Ice buildup is a big thing, especially this part of the year. I don't know about you guys, but I woke up to some snow and ice on the ground. Just make sure that you're keeping your ice cleared and all that. One of the biggest things is to just create a home safety plan with you and your family. So that way, if something happens, right, you have safety plans in place. Like if a fire happens, where are we going to meet up afterwards? Like, are we going to meet across the street at the park or at the neighbor's house or the church or the playground? Those sort of things. That way everyone has a general idea of what's happening, and then have these home safety plans for different aspects of things that you might encounter, right? Such as, like, if mom trips and falls and needs help, what's the safety plan? Is it to call 911? Is it to call a neighbor, run and tell a neighbor? Is it something along those lines? So create those home safety plans and make sure that your loved ones know them is a big one. And then always, just a good general safety tip, always lock your doors, even if you're home, because you never know. People will wander in. It happens. We get calls on it all the time. People accidentally walk into the wrong house, thinking it's their house. Their house looks similar. They're coming to visit. They go to the wrong house. So I always keep my doors locked, even when I'm at home, and we just generally recommend people do it as well. Are the slides still okay for everybody? Everybody see the slide changes?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So another general safety thing is safety in the car, right? These apply to you as well as your loved one. If you're teaching your loved one to drive, which we get a lot of, like, young drivers, especially down here near, like, the Orem Provo area, right? We get a lot of college students, a lot of high school students, things like that. Just general safety in the car. Use seat belts, car seats, and ensure proper fit, right? If you have a loved one that needs to be in a car seat or a booster seat, make sure that it's installed properly. You can do this by checking, like, the instructions, checking online, pulling on it, making sure that it's adjusted well and sits well, and ensure the proper fit for seatbelts, car seats, and those booster seats, right? Like, make sure that if they're wearing a seatbelt, it's not up and across, like, their neck or their face. It's down across the shoulder where you'd want it to be. Another big safety tip is watch speed, especially with young drivers. If your loved one's learning to drive, everyone gets kind of a lead foot in them. It seems like, especially around Utah, that tends to be a thing. I don't think I've ever seen so many speeders as before I moved here. But just watch your speed. Even just 5 miles an hour going faster equates to so many hundreds of feet in stopping distance, right? So if you're going 65 versus 70, you're going to have a much longer stopping distance, a much shorter reaction time in order to be able to safely maneuver your vehicle. So just watch your speed. Just because someone else is speeding doesn't mean that you have to. And then always, this is a good one. Not a lot of people follow this, but always check both ways before proceeding into a green light. So if you're sitting at a red light and it turns green, just take that quick second, look left and right, make sure no cars are about to run the red. There's been a lot of accidents that can be saved that way by just double checking, making sure that no one's doing something they're not supposed to do. Just taking that extra split second to check. The same is true for like if you're pulling out of a parking lot or parking garage, right? It kind of goes with our other safety tip, which is just don't assume that you know what other drivers are doing, and don't assume that they know what you're doing. How many times is it that you think one driver's doing something and then they do something completely different? A lot of accidents and stuff is caused that way, and a lot of injuries and whatnot can occur due to car accidents. So that's just a big one. Just make sure that you're monitoring those safety tips if your loved one's learning to drive or having them in the car with you. So safety in the community, right? Just 3 basic tips here. I'm sure there'll be questions. We can take some questions on the end on like recommended rules and things like that, but just general safety tips. Just make sure that you work on rules and plans for what is acceptable and what you or your loved one is going to do out in the community, whether that's with you or if they are going out on their own with friends or with other family members, right? They should know like what they're allowed to do, where they're allowed to go, things like that, and what the plans are for like if you need help, if you need uh, a caregiver or someone right away, have a plan in place on how they can take those steps in order to affect that, right? Just pre-planning can help immensely in things like reaction time and keeping calm and knowing kind of having a plan of basically what you're doing, right? If you know what you're going to do in these instances, when these instances happen, it tends to just go a lot smoother and people are a lot calmer and we can sort things out a lot quicker. If they're going out in the community, even if it's with you, make sure that they know and have contact information, right? So if you're going out with your loved one, make sure that they have contact information for you. Make sure that they know your name, probably date of birth. Make sure that they know their name and date of birth, phone number, address, things like that. Because if we come across them and they get separated, if they don't know contact information or names of caregivers or parents, it becomes more difficult for us to try and track down someone that's responsible to come and to be able to reconnect you with your loved one, basically. Because that's all we want to do. We want to make sure that they get back with you. We understand these things happen with everybody, right? Kids wander off, people get mixed up in crowds. Nobody's in trouble. We just want to be able to reconnect you and your loved one as quick as possible. So having them know contact information and for you and maybe others is a great aspect of that, right? If they have your contact information as well as contact information for an aunt or another caregiver as well, just as a backup is awesome, right? Because if you're panicking calling 911 and we're trying to call you, then the calls aren't going through and it's a mess. Another tip that not a lot of people think of is just to know a description for everyone. And what I mean by that is take a second before you go out in the community or you let your loved one go out in the community, is maybe write down or take a quick picture of them so that you know what they're wearing, what their hairstyle is, things like that, because those descriptions are big for us. So like if you get separated from your loved one or they end up not coming home when they're supposed to, if we know what they're wearing, about how tall they are, about how much they weigh, what their hair looks like, whether or not they wear glasses, like all of those things, I should say, they play a big part, right? Because if we're in a big crowded area, like say there's like an outdoor concert or fireworks show and you get separated from your loved one, us being able to quickly be able to identify, oh, it's the individual in the blue shirt and red pants, right? Although there might be others wearing that, it helps narrow it down immensely than just a general 12-year-old that has brown hair. Just knowing those descriptions and even those photos that you can quickly give to us so we can disseminate to other officers is a great tip for when you or your loved one's going out in the community. So this and the fraud is probably what's going to take up the most of our presentation today. just because a lot of times technology is always advancing and online safety is always advancing, and the need for online safety is one of the bigger things that we could use, that we could pay attention to today, right? Most people have access to some sort of computer, whether that be a cell phone, a laptop, an iPad, things like that. And almost all of these devices connect online, right? You can buy a toothbrush that connects online, so you can download different brushing styles and things like that. Like all of these things have online and internet connection. And so we're just going to kind of go over a couple things more in depth, but just going over technology and online safety is just to learn about what devices your loved one has and what devices you have, right? Because if you know what devices they have and what they're capable of, then you can go in and make rules and plans and things with them and maybe adjust how parental controls work, right? Another thing is to know about the dangers that are online and in technology, right? It's hard for you to help your loved one stay safe online, just as it would be out in the community, if you don't know what dangers there are, right? Just as you know the danger of like looking both ways before you cross the street, you should know about the dangers online. Like don't have like make sure that you know your friends and things like that that you're talking to online. Make sure that you know them in person rather than talking to strangers, things of that nature. And we'll get into some of that here in a little bit. We'll talk more about like rules and things that you can do. Um, Establish rules and parental controls. So sit down with your loved one, and if it's at all feasible, right? Sometimes they're really young and whatnot, or they might not quite understand certain things, or they have certain technology that is really locked down. So sometimes having the rules is kind of, you should have general rules between, like, what I'm trying to say is that you should have rules and ideals of what parental control should be in place, right? So they should know what they should and shouldn't be doing and what they should and shouldn't be seeing online, who they should and shouldn't be talking to. And then you should be using the parental controls and privacy controls that are on devices, because most devices have them, which kind of goes back into the learning about the devices that they have, and just utilize those parental controls, right? Um, and just utilizing those things together to help minimize dangers online, right? Um, and then probably one of the biggest things that, I don't know about you, but one of the biggest things that helps me when I'm learning anything is to actually learn the why, right? Someone can tell me something 100 times, I'm not going to understand until I understand the why, right? It's the old adage of like trying not to have your hand burn on a stove. It's like, well, why? Well, because it would hurt. Well, why does it hurt? Well, so educating and knowing about the dangers online is a big part of it, right? If they know about the dangers and how to avoid them, a lot of the safety tips can play out a lot better, right? A lot of times that we find that people are taking advantage of online, or they fall for the frauds, or they, are making friends with people that they shouldn't. It's because they might not necessarily understand the why and the dangers of it, right? And how these things work. So going into the knowing the devices, like I was saying, understand what the device is and what it can and can't do, right? So if you have something like an iPad, knowing what it is, right? It's a tablet, but knowing what it can and can't do. Can this iPad make phone calls? Is it connected to the cell network? Can it connect to the Wi-Fi? Can this other tablet do those things if I don't want my loved one to have access to that yet? Or do I want them to have access to that so that they can call me at any time from their iPad? Things of that nature. Know if it's like a phone, if it's an iPad, if it's a computer, just know what it can and can't do, right? A lot of these devices have so many features that you wouldn't think that they'd be able to do, or that you wouldn't think that the dangers are there, because you wouldn't imagine that like an iPad can make phone calls, but it's there and it can happen, right? So if you know what the device is and what it can and can't do, then you can help avoid some of that, right? Understand that some apps and games have things called microtransactions. There's been instances where like a loved one will get on an app, right? And these apps have these little tiny transactions where they can buy more lives for $3, where they can get double the experience points for $2 or whatever. And then a lot of times these parents don't understand that those are in that type of app until their loved one, who might not understand the repercussions of buying these things and charging it to their account over and over and over and over again, leads to large bills, right? And then it's just no fun for everybody. So just understanding that some apps have that, knowing what apps do and don't, can avoid some headaches. There's been news articles, it's been a while now, but there was one where like a 5-year-old ended up charging like $20,000 in microtransactions for playing a game, right? Because they didn't quite understand that they're purchasing it with their parents' money and the value of that, right? And then the parents didn't understand that that was possible within that app. And then again, understand and learn about the privacy modes on all devices and accounts. So not only should you be learning about the devices, you should be learning about accounts, right? So learn what parent restrictions like Facebook or Instagram might have, what sort of privacy modes that they might have, so that way people can't see certain profiles and things like that. It's even good for us to know as caregivers, like what it is that is visible and isn't visible on our account, and how we can minimize some and take back some of the privacy that we find in social media. So more about the dangers that are online. So you don't know who's behind the keyboard, right? So you could friend someone that you met at work, but it turns out it's not actually that person from work. They took another picture from that person's actual profile and is acting like them and is talking to you now. You don't actually know who's behind the keyboard, right? It's not hard for anybody to get on to Facebook and type in whatever name, right? You could go on there and type in John Smith and pretend to be John Smith by finding a photo of him. You just don't know who you're actually talking to behind the keyboard, right? So we'll get into like kind of the tips on how to mitigate that and how to help your loved ones mitigate that. But just knowing that that's the case is a big thing. Another one is things such as spam, malware, phishing. Like we all hear about these things at work. It happens all the time. People fall for it. People fall for it on their home computers, right? So don't click on unknown sites, links, or downloads. If you're not sure about a site, before you like make a purchase, before you click on it, before you sign up for an account, talk to friends that might be interested in that sort of thing, right? So if I'm going to order police gear for myself and there's like this police gear website that I don't really know about, I might talk to some of my coworkers at work and see if they've ever used it and see what their thoughts on it is. I might Google search it and be like, is policegear.net a real site, and see what comes up, right? And you should be doing all of those things in order to protect yourself from all of these sites. And you should be teaching your loved one about that too. Just avoiding unknown sites, the unknown links and downloads that you might get in emails, that you might find on websites, things like that, because you never actually know where those links go or what they might contain. Like I said, always check and activate privacy settings. I can't say this enough times. A lot of times parents just don't know about the privacy settings and what their kid can and can't do on these social media sites, on these devices, things like that. And then another big one is using a secure network, right? You never know who's on a Wi-Fi network with you. If it's at Starbucks, anyone that can jump on a public Wi-Fi network can jump on there and do whatever. So make sure that your loved ones know that, and not to join random Wi-Fi networks that they find just because it's Wi-Fi. Tips about the dangers online: close unused accounts. It's really easy for us, especially in this day and age where there's so many subscriptions and accounts and different things to monitor and whatnot. So close your unused accounts. Have your loved one close the unused accounts, right? If they have an account for some sort of game or something, right, and then they kind of grow out of that game, make sure that you close those accounts, so that way that's not always tied to their email, and it's not always tied to things that people can get into, right? Because if they can access those old accounts that you never use or monitor anymore, if hackers can get in there, then they can get it elsewhere. Make sure you and your loved one have strong and multi-authenticated passwords, right? There's easy ways and tips and tricks to do this for you and your loved one, and still remember the password. One that I use is I like to make a sentence, right? And then I'll use like the first or second letter of each word of the sentence. So like if I had a sentence that was like, I love cats, I could do like ILC, right? But instead of an I, maybe I'll do like an exclamation point. So it's still I love cats, and then like whatever year or whatever that I got my cat, or something like that, right? But having those strong passwords really help. It helps prevent people from getting past the privacy settings and parental controls that you have set up already that protect you and your loved ones. So having the strong and multi-authenticated passwords is a big deal. For those of you that don't know, the multi-authenticated passwords is when like you log in with your passcode and then it sends you like a code to your phone or something like that to a different device to verify that it's you. It's a pain when you're trying to hurry and log into something. It's a pain, but it's of vital importance. It really, really helps with your online security. Um, back up yours and your data, and have your loved one back up their data. If they're going through school and they have like important things on there, or you have important things and they're on like a computer and whatnot, just make sure you have that information backed up, because if your computer does fall victim to malware or something like that, um, then they can try and ransom you your information basically, which we'll talk about more in the fraud section. But if you have that information backed up, then you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to fall victim to it. So sometimes it's worth just having like a $20 external hard drive that you can plug in, back up all your important photos and things like that, and just have a backup of it. It also helps even for things that aren't necessarily fraud related, like if your computer goes down and things like that, right? Check secure sites. So before you or your loved one really use a site, dig into it, verify it, and check the URL. So the URL is where it says like www.google or whatever. It'll say either HTTP or HTTPS. If it has the S afterwards, then it typically means that it's a secured site, right? And it'll also have like a little picture of a lock up there in the URL somewhere. So those secured sites are a big deal, because then you know that like, okay, this is a company that's working on keeping the data safe and keeping the website safe. So then maybe it's okay for your loved one to go on that website. Another big one that a lot of people don't think of is just keep devices and apps up to date. So if you have an update, don't try and push it off, because a lot of times it'll have important software updates that will improve security for that device. And the last thing you want is for your child's device to get hacked or your loved one's device to get hacked, just because it wasn't up to date and didn't have the strongest security features possible. All right. So this is kind of where we get in the meat and potatoes of things, right? Which is to establish rules and parental controls. Um, set up parental locks and and privacy modes on all devices and applications. It's good practice for you and your loved ones, right? Make sure your phone is set up so that way it only shares what information you want it to share. Make sure your loved one's like phone or tablet or computer or anything that can connect to the internet has the proper parental locks on it and has proper privacy codes set up on it, right? You can typically find these things in the settings of your phone or the settings of the app. It depends on what device you have and how best to do that. But with a quick Google search, you can quickly figure out how to set those up and learn more about those and what they do. Just because you can teach rules um, and establish practices for what your loved one does online, but you're not going to know everything that's out there, and they're not going to know everything that's out there. And it only takes one mistake for things to end up kind of not where you wanted it to be, right? So just having those parental locks and privacy things on all devices, applications, and profiles is a big deal, right? Especially the social media where everyone shares everything. Have it set to private, especially for your loved one. Like have it set to private, that way not everyone in the World Wide Web that pulls up that social media site can look and see what your loved one's up to. And then also just keep tabs of what your loved one does online, right? If they're there and they're under your care, take the time to keep tabs on them, see what they're doing online, see what they like to do online. This could be as easy as maybe talking to them once a week, and then once a month going through and verifying what apps they might have, things like that, right? Nobody likes having a caregiver or a parent look over their shoulder all the time online, but it's a big deal, right? A lot of what we find is like with children or people with special needs, when they get victimized online or fraud, a lot of times the caregivers are like, well, I had no idea that they were on this chat site. I had no idea that they were doing this sort of thing or talking to this person. Make sure that you're keeping tabs of what they do online, and make sure that you keep tabs and keep updating them and talking to them about the online safety and things like that, just as you would with any other safety. As they might get more responsibilities throughout like the community, such as being able to go out on their own, and you'd update the rules and practices that way, do the same for online. Educate. This is a really big one, if not the biggest, on how to prevent almost anything. It goes the same for like rules in the home and rules in the community, which is just to educate about the dangers and why you do things and what's important and why it's important, right? So if you're letting your loved one go out in the community, go out to a park by themselves, make sure they know things like, this is what I wouldn't tell a stranger. This is why I wouldn't talk to a stranger, right? If a stranger tells me this is what I should and shouldn't do about that information, right? Just as you would update those as they get more responsibilities or might run into these situations further on, just keep doing that. So teach them about private information, like don't share their birthday online, don't share their address, things like that. Even if they are talking to their quote unquote friends online, because you never know who's behind the keyboard, right? Teach about the dangers of sending or receiving illicit images. Nobody wants to talk about it. No one wants to think about their loved ones falling into that trap. That's why it's important to teach the dangers of it. A lot of times people will get frauded out and things of that nature, and they get tricked and things like that. If you can teach them about the dangers and how to avoid it, then it's just a lot easier, right? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Don't answer phone numbers that you don't know. Everyone these days gets spam calls, right? People saying like, "Oh, your bill's overdue, you're this or that." And again, we'll get into that a little bit on the fraud side of things. But just don't answer phone numbers unless you know them, right? If it's super important, they will call back, they will leave a message, they will text you, right? Or they'll get a hold of someone that knows how to get a hold of you if it's really that important. A big one to teach loved ones, right? I understand that not all loved ones might not have access to social media and things like that, but any sort of like games or things of that nature, just make sure that you're not adding or talking to people that you don't know in person, right? And verify it's them, right? If you think that you're talking to your aunt Sophia, um, just verify with her that like, yes, this is her account and that's who I've been talking to. Because again, it's so easy to make a fake profile of somebody. Um, Step lightly, be aware of your digital footprint. So everything you do online leaves a digital footprint, right? Or in this case, every step someone takes online leaves a digital footprint. So you want to really step lightly about what you're doing online, right? Be mindful about what you post and what others post about you. Just giving out how much information can be given out based on people posting just general things, like a birthday celebration or whatever. But then someone knows your birthday because they go, oh, they celebrated their 34th birthday today. Oh, this is how old they are. This is their date of birth, which is one of those things where it's like that's private information that you don't want to share online. So maybe wait a couple days before you post your birthday photos or whatever, or make it ambiguous. Like, oh, within the last week I celebrated this sort of thing, and maybe not post how old you are and things like that online. The same for other accidental information, such as posting photos when you go on vacation. It's a huge crime of opportunity. It's something that you need to be aware of. And we find a lot of people's loved ones do it without them realizing, right? So if you take a teenager out on vacation, they're taking photos and posting on Instagram. Everyone that they're friends with can see that you're not at home. So your home's vacant. It could be open for burglary, things of that nature. And then also just be mindful of posting where you are at any given time. That way people aren't able to keep track of you in that sense, right? Because you want loved ones to be able to keep track of you. You don't want random people online to know where you are all the time. So if you go to the same appointment every Tuesday, maybe don't post about your appointment every Tuesday, and make sure that your loved ones are aware of the same thing. And then just know that, and teach your loved ones that what you do online can affect your life offline if you're not careful. So this was a short video. I'll just kind of talk about it a little bit because I'm not 100% sure it'll work. But this guy basically sits down with 5 teens and he shows them all the information that he can gather within just 6 clicks. So he comes up with a rule where he's like, hey, you friend me on Facebook as part of this as part of this education thing, and I'll show you what I can find out about you in 6 clicks. And he's able to, just from the friend on Facebook and then 6 clicks from there, he can find out what accounts they have on different websites, what they've been up to, what their mom has said about them, like what their favorite things are, what their non-favorite things are, right? Who they're friends with, just things of that nature. It's a really cool video. If I find a link, I'll send it to Sylvia to send it out. Um, but it's talking about just 6 clicks or 6 degrees of clicks, and just like how much information we put out online, and how important it is to realize that and keep your personal life locked down and keep your information locked down, and how important it is to teach your loved ones that. All right, so fraud. Again, we want to learn about the various forms of fraud, and we'll go into it and we'll dig into it. Keep up to date with the most common types of fraud attempts, and then learn how to avoid fraud and teach your loved ones. Because like anything else, it's going to come down to the same basic rules where you want to learn about it, you want to know about it, and then you want to know how to avoid it, and then you want to teach your loved one and keep tabs on them so that way they don't fall victim to it. Yeah. So the main types of fraud that we see is mail fraud, phone fraud, in-person, and internet fraud. And we'll go over them a little more in depth, but those are the 4 main types that we see. So common types of mail fraud, we typically see like sweepstake lotteries or inheritance, right? You'll get a letter saying, oh, you won this lottery for X, Y, and Z that you didn't put into, or you won the sweepstakes that you don't remember putting into. It's typically a fraud if coming from that sense, right? Because they'll just send it out to everybody that they can with the junk mail and just see who they can get in. It's all a game of numbers. It only takes one person to fall for it, and then everyone's getting spammed in their mail for the next forever. Notices asking for payment. So if you suddenly start receiving notices that saying, hey, hey, your power bill's overdue, and you're like, but I paid the power bill, it might be worth just checking with the power company themselves rather than just believing the payment and it saying like, go to this website and pay this way or something like that. And then advertisements for a service for a suspiciously low price, right? Everyone loves a good deal, but you're going to be a little suspicious if someone says get 20 large pizzas for $1, right? It's the same idea for anything. If a deal seems too good to be true, it probably is. Keep an eye out for those sort of things in the mail. It's not uncommon to get coupons, but if it's extreme, then just understand that it could be someone trying to defraud you as pretending to be a fake business. And make sure that your loved ones are aware of what they're finding in the mail, right? Because if you're leaving out junk mail and they're like, oh, well, I want a free computer or whatever, and they go and fill out the form, then it becomes difficult that way. Common types of phone fraud, IRS and law enforcement fraud, which is one that we see a lot lately, which is someone's calling you, they're pretending to be the IRS, or they're pretending to be a law enforcement agency. They're pretending to be the IRS saying, you owe this much on taxes, you need to pay it right now, sort of thing. The IRS doesn't do that, right? People will call and be like, I'm so-and-so from the police department. They'll be like, I'm Officer Hutchinson from the police department, and you have a warrant out for your arrest. You need to take care of this right away by paying this much money, right? Trust me, if it's not true, right? We're not going to ask for payment for a warrant. There also could be pretending to be a loved one in need of money. We see this happening a lot more. Well, someone will call you, kind of mimic the voice to where it's close, pretending to be a loved one, saying, hey, I was visiting here and like my card got shut off and I have a flat tire. I need you to transfer some money to me right away, right? A lot of times it's not, right? So like with anything, you want to verify these things. And then again, just notice a payment. It's not uncommon to get a phone call from a random number saying, hey, this is AT&T and you're overdue on payment, when you're like, well, that's weird, I'm with Verizon. Or even if you're with AT&T and you're like, I pay my bill. Just understanding that those things can be common types of fraud. Common types of in-person fraud. So you have affinity fraud, which is like asking for some sort of investment or donation based on a specific group or association, right? So if someone comes knocking on your door and they're like, I'm here for the Hairless Kittens Awareness Fund, right? It might be worth it to be like, well, I'll look into it and then I'll think about donating later. And if they're really pushy about it, it's typically a sign that it's a fraud, right? Because most charities will have other ways to donate or ways that you can track it down later to donate. And so if you have things like that, just make sure, even if it's not that extreme where it's like, well, of course, there's not a Hairless Kittens Awareness Foundation. It could sound pretty real. So just take the extra step to make sure that you're verifying these things, right? Again, fake charity and then fake services or business. People will go around knocking on doors being like, I'm here to look at installing solar. And while they're doing that, they're looking at your house to see what they can take from outside or what's not locked up, or saying that, well, for this service, you have to prepay and then we'll have someone come out and fix whatever, upgrade your plumbing or whatever. Um, so, like with anything, you just want to be aware of these things. Online fraud, which is again a huge one lately, which you have phishing attempts, which is not spelled like the fun version of fishing where you go out and catch fish. But it attempts to trick people to reveal information or to install malware, right? It's those random emails you get with links where it's like, oh, your receipt's been processed. Click here, and you're like, that's weird. I didn't think I ordered anything. Chat room conversations and quid pro quo or this for that sort of conversations that can happen in chat rooms. Someone saying things like, I will give you lots of money if you just let me know what your bank account is so that way I can give you the money or send the money, right? Or you send me $100 and then I'll send you $1,000 because I just need $100 to free up my money. Fake websites and links is another thing to watch out for. There's this little sort of image here which kind of shows you things to keep an eye out for, right? Like your fake sender domain, suspicious subject and comment, such as your account has been limited in order to restore your PayPal account. Bad grammar is a big one. It's a common way to find these things, right? If it is a real email that's going out to millions of people from PayPal, it's probably been spell checked and grammar checked 4,000 times from people that work at PayPal. So things like you need to log in your account is things to watch out for. Hovering over a link reveals a suspicious URL. So not a lot of people know this, where it says like log in your account. If you just hover over that without clicking it, it'll show you what the HTTP is and where exactly you're going on that link. Fake shopping. So this goes in hand with like fake websites. You get on like eBay or a fake website and you buy something and then it turns out it doesn't come. So you got to be careful and verify what you're buying and things like that. A lot of people like to buy things on Facebook Marketplace. Like with anything else, you got to be careful with that and make sure your loved one's aware of that, right? If they're getting an allowance and they want to spend it on something on Facebook Marketplace to extend the bang for their buck, essentially, make sure that you're helping them understand and verify these shopping things. That way they're not out going, well, so and so's not home. I just want to spend $30 and buy this cool laptop that just barely came out or whatever. If they can understand that's probably not reasonable, that they should talk to you about that sort of stuff first, it can go a long way. A big one that might happen with individuals with special needs, especially, is something called sweetheart frauds, right? Where someone will, in like a chat room or on social media, start talking to someone and start pretending to be emotionally involved with them, right? Pretending to be like they're dating online and things like that. And then they kind of get that sort of thing, and then that sort of relationship building, and then they ask for something like, oh, well, I really need $500 so that way I can come visit you or whatever, because that's how much a ticket would cost or something like that, right? Someone that might be all Twitter pated or whatnot, not thinking properly, might not realize that, oh, if I send them $500, I'm probably not going to get the $500 back and they're probably not going to come visit, right? So just be mindful of those things. So again, how to spot fraud. Websites or links to unknown sites, spelling errors, someone being pushy or saying that the problem is urgent, right? So if someone is at your door saying it's super urgent that you would donate to this charity, or is super pushy about selling you something, right? No one likes pushy salesmen anyway. Take the time, take a breather, right? If it's a real business or charity, it'll be there next week. It'll be there in a month, right? They really shouldn't be that pushy about donations or about making a sale. They should allow you the time to verify things and verify that they are who they say they are. If they ask for immediate payment or odd payments, that's another big one. If you go to Walmart right now, there's signs above like self-checkout things that say like, don't ever send gift card numbers to someone that's asking for it. It's a fraud, things like that. If they are saying, well, you have to pay me first and then this happens, there's a chance that there's a fraud and you should look into that. Or if they're asking for odd payment methods is one of the biggest tip-offs lately, right? The reason that they like things like gift cards and whatnot. So if they ask for iTunes gift cards or prepaid Visa cards, things like that, it's because those things aren't as traceable as bank account wires and things like that. So just be aware of that and make sure your loved one's aware of that as well. So tips to avoid fraud. Never divulge sensitive information online or over the phone. It kind of ties into everything we've been talking about, but just make sure that you know what you're giving out and what information you're giving out. Stick to well-known sites, right? Stick to your Googles, your Bings, things like that. Don't go to odd sites that you've never heard of and none of your friends have ever heard of. Don't click on links or download things that you don't know what they are, right? It's a big one. Make sure that you and your loved one know that. Never wire money or use gift cards or preloaded cards for payment. If someone's asking for prepaid cards or gift cards, it's probably a fraud. And then one of the biggest ways to avoid fraud, just with anything else, is to never pay right away and always check if it's real first. Verify, right? If your grandma says that she's calling that she really needs money right now, she's calling from this weird phone, take the time, maybe call grandpa and then call her personal number and then, and just verify that these things are what's actually happening and that's not someone trying to defraud you. And the same what goes with all the other frauds. Just look into it, take the time, take a breather, and make sure that it's the real deal before going anywhere with anything. And make sure that if your loved one is interested in something, make sure that you take the time to sit down with them, teach them how to look for these things and help them look for these things. Specifically to IRS and law enforcement fraud tips, right? The IRS isn't going to call you without sending a letter of notification first. So if they're claiming that you owe a bunch on back taxes and you receive this random call and you have never heard of it before, it's probably not true, right? Law enforcement will never ask for payment for a warrant. It's done in person through the court, right? If law enforcement needs to contact you about a warrant, trust me, we will do it in person. We're rather good at it. If you're unsure, call the IRS or the law enforcement agency directly, just as you would with anything else, right? So if you get a call from Officer Hutchinson saying you need to take care of this warrant, it might be worth calling our non-emergency line to verify that that's who's there, that they're working right now, and that's who's calling you, right? Again, just always verify. Always check with friends and families, see if they set up a new account before friending them. Call friends and families if it matters, if it's a matter that involves them. Check with your bank or business if the payment or deal is accurate, right? And then also check verified phone numbers or sites where you can be, or the site that you were contacted by, right? So if you're contacted by an email from Wells Fargo about your bank statement, just maybe call Wells Fargo directly rather than following that website or that link. And teach your loved ones to do the same, right? If they get a message from Xbox or whatever social media site, teach them to not just follow that email, but to actually go to the source directly and verify that that's what's happening. And then just a little tidbit here, the Better Business Bureau can be used to check for a real charity or not. So I know I kind of blew through there, and it's a lot of general sort of things, but I'm happy to answer questions on more specific items. I just kind of want to do more of general tips and ways that you can help your loved one and help yourself. That way you can kind of customize it as needed, right? Because keeping a loved one safe is not a catch-all approach, right? What might work for me and my family might be completely different from yours. So, but I have time right now if anyone wants to ask any questions.
And we have a small group today, so feel free to either use the chat if you'd like, or you can just unmute your microphone and ask that way.
I promise I don't bite. And even if I did, it's online, so it's okay.
Officer Hutchinson, I have a question. I have a question about protecting our loved ones from a quote unquote friend who might start to try to take advantage of them financially. Like, we're all going to go to the movies, and oh, I don't have my wallet, but my good friend here, Sue, can you cover me this time? And then kind of, how can a parent navigate that sort of situation where this is a friend, it's a known person, but they're starting to take advantage of them in that sort of way?
Right. So we actually ran into an issue with this with my sister-in-law, right? She's younger than I am. But it all comes down to having open conversations about money and what the value of money is, right? And what sort of value friends should and shouldn't have, and what sort of actions you believe or that you want for your loved one's friends to have, right? So if you have a friend that's taking advantage of a loved one, right? Make sure that you're sitting down with your loved one and asking them about like how are their friends treating you? How was your day? How was going to the movies? What happened? Who paid? Things like that, right? It doesn't have to come off as like super interrogative, right? You don't have to put them under a spotlight and in a dark room with a metal table like you're the FBI, but just having that open conversation with them about what's what's happening and things like that and what's going on and how their friends are treating them, right? As well as keeping tabs on different things like, wow, you seem to be going to the movies more often. You seem to be spending more money than you probably should on the movies. And that comes in line with keeping tabs on them with different things, right? If you're helping grow and develop this person, it's worth giving them freedom, but it's also worth helping verify and keep the bumpers on, as it were, right? So if you're bowling, they have the inflatable bumpers. You're helping them learn how to get a strike, but it might be worth having the bumpers on there so that way they don't roll a gutter ball over and over again. So just keeping tabs on them and keeping tabs on like what they're doing, how much money they might be spending, things like that, that you can have those hard conversations with them about what really a friend is and what a friend isn't. If that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Mm.
I have a question. I have a teen with Down syndrome, but I also work with teens that have special needs. And what about if they had a text from like a random person? How would you suggest us to like prepare them or to talk them through that? Because I don't look at everything that happens on my daughter's phone.
Right. And especially as they hit their teenage years, right? They kind of start to have that more independence and they kind of start demanding that more independence, right? Um,
Yeah.
so, so, are you saying like it's like a random phone number that they might not know, or?
Yeah, and like my daughter only has about 7 phone numbers that I've allowed on her phone, but there might be a random one that comes up, and then how she thinks everyone's her friend. So, what are some ideas on how to like help her navigate like texts from strangers or phone calls from strangers, or even on Facebook if someone suddenly starts talking to them?
Right. So again, it helps come down to educating in the parental controls, right? So Facebook in particular, right? You can set it up to where only people that are friends with them can message them, and whatnot. It's a little harder if they end up friending everybody on Facebook, but that's where a lot of the education portion comes in, where it's like, hey, if this happens, right? No matter what the text says, you're not in trouble for anything. And maybe they are your friend. I want to help you make sure that they are, sort of thing, right? And just teaching them that they can come to you and how to best look at the text message in particular and be able to make a judgment call on that and how to verify with you and work with you, right? Which is something that teens aren't great at doing, is working with their parents all the time. um, but just trying to have that conversation as to why, right? So maybe you're getting this random message, not necessarily because they're your friend, but because of all these other things. And so let me help you make sure that it is your friend, and maybe you can make a friend out of it. But if not, then we can avoid a lot of heartbreak going that way. Does that kind
Thank
of
you.
help?
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm. I'm also open to suggestions if you guys have more suggestions about like topics or how the presentation was done and things like that. If you have any, if you can't think of a question, but you're like, oh, I wish I would have seen this or something like that, you can also let me know that. I won't have any hard feelings, I promise. Any other questions?
If you do have any questions or suggestions on future trainings or other topics that we can collaborate with Officer Hutchinson on, we would love to hear about it. You might not have something right now that you're thinking of, but if it does come up, feel free to send me an email because we're so grateful for this partnership and we really want to be able to meet your needs and be able to pull this great resource from law enforcement and working with families.
I have a question.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I thought this was more along the lines of like stranger danger safety, but I have like a son that's, you know, special needs and he's going to be 6 this year. But because of his special needs, he trusts everybody. And I mean, he has multiple occasions like tried to walk away with strangers. So maybe in the future, if we could do like a webinar on stranger danger and how to best present it to our children, you know, because he, you know, he's autistic, but he trusts everybody. So I don't know what to do.
Right. Yeah. It's a real difficult spot, right? Because especially with special needs, they want to be everyone's friend and everyone wants to be their friend, right? They're so special and they're so caring and kind. I know like with my brother-in-law who has autism, he will, anybody that says his name, if you hear us saying the name Cade and you say Cade, he will follow you to the end of the earth. Like, and it becomes a real hassle at times. Yeah, going forward, I'd absolutely be open to that. And my only suggestion for the time being, I guess, is kind of, which I'm sure you're already doing, is that as everyone knows with special needs, they're so special and they bless us so well and so much. But at the same time, we really have to make sure that we have that extra effort to make sure that they have the safety that they deserve. So if like teaching about stranger danger isn't working necessarily right now, just make sure that we have extra eyes on them at all times and things like that. And I know that in my last one we also talked about like things like ways that parents have kind of helped with kids with autism that are nonverbal that wander off in the night and things like that. Which I think Sylvia might still have that presentation too, if you wanted to go back and look at that as well. But yeah. Also, any questions going forward, guys? If you guys end up having questions later or want to talk to me personally, Sylvia has my email and you're more than welcome to email me at any point. And I'm pretty good about answering that. So.
And Tara, I'm happy to send you the link for that previous presentation as well. If you signed up for the RSVP for today, I'll find your email on there and send you the recorded session.
Okay, that would be great. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's one of the hardest things is we want to protect our children and our teens and young adults without scaring them though, right? Like to give them a realistic view and expectations, but then also just not to make them scared. Oh,
yeah. And it's a real balancing act. It's difficult, right? With anybody, right? As people get older and they want to adventure off and do their own thing, sometimes they don't always take advice to heart. I know that I didn't when I was younger. But it's not until you become kind of an adult and kind of take on the caretaker role that you're like, oh, that's why I had all those rules growing up, you know? So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Officer Hutchinson. We appreciate your time and effort putting this presentation. And thank you for everyone attending. I hope you guys have a great rest of the day.
Thanks so much, guys.